Hi, my name is Alan Noble, and today we're going to be going over iteration, a concept that if you learn it will open up so many new avenues for you as a coder. Mr. Noble, what exactly is iteration? I'm so glad you asked, younger Alan. It's hard to implement something in our code without knowing what exactly it is. Let's keep it old school and refer back to a dictionary. According to Oxford Dictionary, iteration is simply the repetition of a process. In terms of programming, it is the act of repeating certain aspects of our code multiple times. Mr. Noble, so how do you exactly implement iteration in your code? Another great question, younger Alan. There's two ways to implement loops in your code. The first way is a while loop, and then the second way is a for loop. Okay, let's start with while loops. A while loop is indicated by the while statement, and essentially a while loop executes a certain block of code while a condition is met. Let's do an example. Let's do an example of a countdown. A countdown goes from 3, 2, 1. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out where this countdown starts. This countdown starts at 3. So we can initialize a variable I and set it equal to 3. I just chose int I equals 3. So now we get into the specifics of a while loop. When I do while loops, the first thing I like to figure out is the condition that continuously needs to be met while the while loop is executing. We know that our countdown needs to go from 3 to 1. Our countdown is always going to be greater than 1. So that's a condition I'm going to choose, because 3 is greater than 1, 2 is greater than 1, and 1 is greater than 1. And we need to make sure that our while loop stops executing after we print out 1. So the condition I'm going to choose is I is greater than or equal to 1. Now that we've figured out the condition, the next thing that we need to do is actually see out what I is, because we need to see out a countdown. That's pretty simple. We can just use a cout statement. That is cout I, and we can leave a space. And then a semicolon. So what this does is, as the while loop is executing, while it's repeating operations, we can just see out what I is. And now finally, we need to make sure to decrement I, because I need to go from 3 to 2 to 1. That's pretty simple. We can just do minus minus I. We can walk through exactly how this while loop proceeds in order to explain why I added this decrement operator right here. So let's actually execute our code and see what happens. So the first thing is, I gets initialized. We'll have a current value for I, and so I is 3. Next, we go into the while loop. We check our condition. Is I is 3, is 3 greater than or equal to 1? Yes, 3 is greater than or equal to 1. So we enter the while loop, then we print out what I is and a space. So currently I is 3, so we print out 3, and then we add a little space. Next, we need to decrement I. So I goes from 3 to 2. Now here's where the magic of the while loop takes place. After we decrement I, we go back up and we check this condition again. We check, is I is 2, is 2 greater than or equal to 1? Yes, 2 is greater than or equal to 1. So we see out I and a space. Next, we decrement I. So I goes from 2 to 1. Then we go back up, We check I is 1. Is 1 greater than or equal to 1? Yes. So we see out I and a space. I is 1, so we see out 1 and a space. Then we need to decrement I. I goes from 1 to 0. We go back up and we check, is I? I is 0. Is 0 greater than or equal to 1? No, 0 is not greater than or equal to 1. So we know our while loop has to stop executing. So we stop right there. It doesn't enter the cout statement, doesn't decrement anymore. Our while loop stops running and goes on to the next part of our code. But what's good is we finished our countdown. It went from 3, 2, to 1. This is a while loop. It just repeats a certain block of code as long as a condition is met. Mr. Noble, you've gone over while loops, but what about for loops? Alright, so let's do for loops then. We can use the example for a countdown again because for loops are very similar to while loops. So again, a countdown goes from 3, 2, 1. And now that we're implementing with a for loop, we need to start with a for statement to indicate the existence of for loop, executing a certain block of code with a starting value, a condition that needs to be met, as well as something to maybe decrement or increment a certain value. And we'll get into the specifics of that as we go through this example. So if we're starting with a countdown, we know it's going to start with 3. So we can do int I equals 3. We know there's a condition that continuously needs to be met as this for loop is executing. And that condition is the same as last time. I is greater than or equal to 1. And now we need something to actually decrement I. So that's just going to be the decrement operator, the minus minus I. And now we need to see out exactly what I is. And that's the same thing as last time. You can see there's a lot of similar parts between a for loop and a while loop. To me, a for loop is different from a while loop because it has a little bit more syntax to it. So let's just walk through this example really quickly. We start with int I equals 3, so we can keep track of what I is right here, as well as what exactly we're outputting right here. So I starts at 3. We start the for loop. It outs what I is and prints a space. So we do 3 space. Then we go down, we go back up. Now we do the decrementing. So right here, minus minus I, so I goes down to 2. We check, is 2 greater than or equal to 1? Yes, 2 is greater than or equal to 1. So we print out a 2 because of the cout statement, then a space. We go back down, then we go back up to this for loop. We decrement I, goes down to 1. We check, is 1 greater than or equal to 1? Yes, 1 is greater than or equal to 1. We print out 1. We print out the space. We go back up, we decrement I goes down to 0. We know that 0 is not greater than or equal to 1, so this for loop stops executing. So there's the for loop. We've gone over while loops and for loops, and we've done the same example. So I hope that this gives you a better idea of what both those loops are.